What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the stream, and today we're going to be recapping the end of our first season. You say, take a look at our final record there. We actually finished with a very respectable 77-85. I'm surprised because we somehow got better after the trade deadline. I don't know what happened. These guys kicked it into another gear. Let me show you August. Decent numbers. I think that was about 500, maybe a little bit over. And then September, we played really good baseball in September. So I'm really proud of the way these guys finished the season. It seems like there's a little bit more energy in the building now that the evil Jerry Reinsdorf is gone. The guys who are here want to play their best, play their hardest. And it seems like the fans on the South Side are responding. So I'm pretty excited for subsequent seasons. But before we get to the offseason and beyond, let's recap the first season. So let's start first by looking at our injured list to end the year. And the first thing I want to talk about is a very devastating injury to one of our biggest pickups at the trade deadline, Colton Cowser. He actually tore his Achilles on September 14th. This is going to be a very long-term injury. So I know the injuries get wiped out in the offseason for some weird reason. I'm actually going to give him an injury to start next year, which is going to keep him out until, about June-ish. So typically the recovery process for an Achilles is probably about like 9 to 12 months. I'm going to give him about a 9, maybe 10-month recovery period. So I take a look at his numbers on the year. The average dipped a little bit, but the on-base percentage and the slugging stayed strong or even went up a little bit after we acquired him. So he was a solid piece for us. It's a little bit disappointing to see the injury. Hopefully he comes back and regains some of that form and then takes his game to newer heights from there. We also picked up an injury to Luis Robert Jr. He broke his ankle, which was going to keep him out a couple of months. He only missed the final couple weeks of the season. He was our best player this season with a final WAR of 4.9. Probably could have pushed for that 5.9 WAR from the previous season had he not gotten injured, but I'm pretty excited. He has turned himself into a bona fide superstar, and I am happy that we have him locked up for another 3 seasons. Hopefully we can get this squad where it needs to be so we can give him a lucrative contract extension going into that 2028 season. One final guy I want to talk about on this injured list is Chris Flexen. He actually had himself a nice little season. You see he finished the year with a 4.00 ERA and an 8-8 record. Scrolling over to the FIP and component ERA, the FIP was a little bit elevated, mostly because he's not a big strikeout guy, but the component ERA was a solid 3.62. This is not a guy I was expecting to bring back after the first season, but considering he was able to eat quite a bit of innings for us and the level of performance was actually better than I expected, I think I'll bring him back after an arbitration and fill out maybe a 4th or a 5th starter slot for us next season. Recapping how some of our top prospects did, our AAA team did not make the playoffs, but our AA squad did, and they're still currently in the playoffs as of now. Unfortunately, for some reason, MLB The Show still does not save minor league stats, so I'm just going to be able to show you some of the progressions and regressions that these guys had, and I wrote down some of their performances. So Samuel Zavala, he had himself a pretty solid year, finished with a 266, 335, 426 slash line for an OPS of 761. You see some of the gains there. Pretty happy that he was able to have a solid year, although he only grew 2 overall, so that's a little bit concerning, but mostly that's due to some of his struggles against left-handed pitching. That being said, he's going to be a 67, 68 overall, depending on a little bit more progression here down the stretch, and only 20 years old going into next season, so I think we're sitting pretty with him. Checking in on Wilfred Veras, who's a guy I talked about at the mid-season mark. Thought he had also a pretty good year, finished with a 255, 344, 436 slash line, good for a 779 OPS. Didn't really gain anything to his power, but did have some pretty good gains to his vision and his discipline. So this is a guy I'm interested monitoring going forward. He'll probably be in AAA next year, and we'll see if the bat holds up once he reaches that level. One of our midseason acquisitions from the Atlanta Braves, Gerald Quintero, already 22 years old playing in AA, but he had a very respectable slash line with the 262, 343, 413, good for a OPS of 755. Really, really happy to see the power gains he was able to make, +7 against both right and left. That's one of the weaker parts of his bat, so it was good to see him get some gains there, and I think this guy might be able to turn in something for us if he keeps growing like this. We'll see how he does in AAA next year. Going back to the injured list, let us take a look at Jacob Gonzalez. This is a guy that I talked about at the midseason about his potential bump. Pretty excited to see some of his overall gains that he had on the year. Really saw a big boost against left-handed pitching, which is nice since he is a left-handed hitter. Slash line wasn't outstanding. He's only hit for 258 average, which could be a little bit better, but he has that outstanding on-base percentage all the way up at 375. Of course, I'd like to see his power numbers kick up a little bit more. He only had a slugging of 362 for a very weak ISO of 104. So going to keep trying to train that power up, hopefully turn him into at least a average size power bat to add to some of those walk rates, good contact rates, and defense. Noah Schultz was able to return from injury eventually, and you can see he has thrown pretty well in the playoffs to this juncture. He finished the season with a modest 4.57 ERA and 1.54 WHIP, but he wasn't able to get a ton of innings because of that shoulder injury. Nonetheless, he was able to get himself to a 66 overall, which will be solid going into next year in his age 21 season, and he will be at AAA. So I'm pretty excited to see what he is able to do when given a full season healthy. Another guy that stood out this season at the AA level is not somebody I have highlighted before, and this is Peyton Payette. I'm not quite sure how to say that, but he had himself one heck of a season with a pristine ERA of 2.76 and a WHIP of 1.28. So this is the guy that I'm going to have to monitor going forward. I might have to push him into AAA despite his overall being a little bit lower than I like because he's already going to be 23. So really going to have to push him aggressively to see if he can get some of those gains and break through into the majors. Final guy I want to point out is one of our B potential boosted guys that I mentioned during the midseason episode, Seth Keener. He finished with a strong 3.39 ERA and a sub-1 WHIP at 0.99. As I mentioned, this is a guy I'm pretty excited about. The Ks per 9 numbers could be better, but they're not terrible. Really like that hits per 9 number though. So this is a guy I am very intrigued by. We will see him in AAA next season. Brian Ramos was one of the guys we highlighted in our initial episode. He did not have a great season, but he did get hot near the tail end of the year to give himself a respectable 266, 312, 417 slash line. Good for a 729 OPS. I wish we could have seen a little bit more gains to his hitting numbers, but very happy and excited to see that he got the good bumps to the fielding reaction that I was training, which should set him up to stick at that third base position. Colson Montgomery was a little bit disappointing in the year. I did talk about how he started the season really hot, but started to tail off. He was pretty cold. He actually had his slugging below 400 going into September, but he was able to kind of knock it up with a hot streak near the end there. He finished with a 228, 294, 404 slash line, good for an only 698 OPS. You see the contact numbers did not get a whole lot of boost, and the power left got no boost at all, but he did get a good boost to his power right, and he did get some boost to his defense as well. So I wouldn't say it was a lost development year. I don't think he's going to break camp next year on the Major League roster, but he will be given an invite, and we'll see. Maybe he performs well, and he could be our starting shortstop next year. Edgar Caro did have some struggles throughout the year, but he finished the season pretty hot, able to get himself to a respectable 263, 333, 339 slash line, good for a 731 OPS. He did have some negatives in the contact left and vision, but he was able to get himself back to neutral for there. In the meantime, he was also able to get some good boost to some of his defensive numbers. You take a look at the +5 to reaction at block, which should be pretty helpful to stick as a good all-around catcher going into next season. Jairo Iriarte almost found his way onto the Major League roster due to some late season injuries. I thought about getting him a spot start or two in the majors in September, but I ultimately decided against it. Nonetheless, his season at AAA was solid. He finished with a 4.05 ERA and a 1.39 WHIP. Overall, his development was solid. Nothing stands out as being outstanding, but again, I'm pretty excited for this kid. He should be on the 40-man roster and vying for a starting rotation spot to start next season. David Garcia is a guy worth mentioning. I did push him into the majors for a little bit, though he was not an elite performer with a 5.16 ERA, but his FIP and his component ERA weren't too bad. I eventually sent him back down to get him some good development at AAA, and I'm glad that I did because he was able to boost himself all the way up to a 71 overall, and he finished with a 2.81 ERA and a 0.92 WHIP. So this is a guy who I think can vie for a bullpen spot out of camp next season, so we'll see how it goes. And the last guy I wanted to mention is Prelander Berroa. We brought him over from the Seattle Mariners in the previous offseason. He had a pretty good season at AAA, finishing with a 3.30 ERA and a 1.10 whip. I think he had something like 38 saves as well in that closer's role. Did get a little bit of time in the majors, finished with a 6.28 ERA there, but not great FIPS or component ERAs, but not overly concerned about that. Really was more excited to see what his development was down there in the minors, and yet another guy that will be competing for a bullpen spot going into the next season. Now let's take a look at how some of our major league guys finished the season. So Dominic Fletcher was a guy I was pretty pleased with all year. You take a look at the final slash line there. He's pretty much going to be a platoon guy because he can't really hit lefties at all. But I'm okay with that. I think he can be a platoon guy for us in the short term and possibly a fourth outfielder going forward. Jose Rodriguez did fill a full-time second base role in the second half of the season. Really happy. The average I can handle at 250 and the 224 ISO is really nice. Obviously would love if he took some more walks. What was his final walk rate? 5.7%. So it's not terrible. He's definitely got some room for growth. He's definitely got to work on those Ks numbers as well. Makes me a little bit concerned for him long-term being consistent, but we'll see what happens with that. Yohan Moncada eventually ended up in the 3-hole somehow, some way after the Luis Robert injury. Just an all-around terrible year. I'm not going to talk too much about him because we talked about him during the mid-season recap. Gavin Sheets actually ended up with a pretty decent slash line on the year, 254, 319, 434. Let's see what his WAR ended up at. Minus 1.2. So at least he stopped the bleeding. But he did not end up a very good WAR player at all. Probably going to bring him back just because he can smash right-handed pitching, and we're got a team that is like begging for offense right now, so I can't be too choosy. Andrew Vaughn actually did have a decent second half of the year. The final numbers are ugly, but that is mostly attributed to how bad he was in the first half. What was his final WAR? So he actually did improve a little bit. He was at like a minus 1.1 or 1.2 as able to get himself back to a 0.9. So I guess little victories, right? Oscar Colas was pretty bad at both AAA and MLB. He's going to be a non-tender. Braden Shoemake, we'll bring him back. I don't really want to keep him as the starting shortstop, but we can at least keep him as a bench infielder. Carlos Perez had a nice little season, so he'll be in the mix for maybe starting catcher, but more likely to be backup catcher next year. Brett Phillips is a guy I'm intrigued to bring back. It's actually a pretty good slash line. He's a really good defender as well, good speed off the bench. Again, another guy that can only play platoon roles, so probably don't want to have too many more guys like that, but this is a guy I wouldn't mind keeping around. We did get Yoelqui Cespedes in the majors for a little bit, although, not too much to speak of. Danny Mendick, Martin Maldonado, another guy. I don't know where those numbers came from. That's outstanding. I'm not going to bring him back because he's going to be 38 and regression's already terrible with him. But one of the more surprising slash lines I think I've ever come across in one of these franchises. Then Lenyon Sosa, he's going to be a DFA candidate. DFA candidate, non-tender candidate, whatever. A little bit of pop in his bat, but not much else. And then finally, Corey Lee is going to be another guy we're moving on from as well. Taking a look at the rotation, Garrett Crochet finished with a 4.07 ERA, but the FIP and component ERA were outstanding, so excited for him to be our ace going forward. Nick Nastrini did get a couple of starts in the majors. I'm not going to move him to that full-time bullpen role quite yet because I'd like to see a little bit more out of him before I make that decision, and we're going to have some open rotation spots in the future. Touki Toussaint was a pleasant surprise this year. 4.32 ERA and a 1.32 WHIP are solid, and then you look at the FIP and the component ERA, pretty good, especially if you can try to get those walks in check a little bit more. I was really surprised to see how well he pitched this year. Definitely going to keep him around for next year. Drew Thorpe was great, a 3.74 ERA with a 1.22 WHIP. The FIP's not great, but mostly elevated because he did give up a little bit too many home runs. Component ERA also looking solid. So the future ace and stud of our staff had a pretty good first cup of coffee in the majors. And then I don't really want to talk about Jake Eater that much because he only had one start. Jared Schuster was not great for us. John Brabia was meh. Jordan Leisure was actually quite poor. I looked into his potential and didn't realize he's actually only a 72 potential, so that explains why he didn't grow at all. We'll keep him around to vie for a bullpen spot, but he's not going to have an inside track for next year. Mike Soroka is going to be he's going to be a free agent, and we're not going to bring him back. I'll be surprised if he signs with anybody. Jake Cousins actually got a little bit of a potential bump from me. The strikeout numbers were insane, 11.76 and a great FIP and component ERA. Michael Kopech Gehrig had a decent second half of the season, and actually when you look at it, his FIP and component ERA, they're not half bad. So, one more season before he hits the free agent market. Maybe he could pitch really well for us next year. Likely we'll be looking to trade him instead of keeping him for long term, because I don't love keeping relievers around. I'd rather capitalize on their values. Sammy Peralta, gave a few potential bumps to, because he had a great ERA and whip, and actually backed up by the FIP and component ERA as well. Steven Wilson got a potential bump by me because of the same reasons. Really surprised that he was as good as he was. He took to the closer's role really well, picked up 27 saves on 31 chances, and I think he only had he had 2 or 3 blown saves as a setup guy as well. So 27 saves and 18 holds, that's really good for a guy, who started the season like a 71, 72 overall. And then the last guy I wanted to mention is actually Juan Then. This is a guy who was, I think, initially in AA and then put him in AAA, and he's like a sub-2 ERA in AAA, and then you see what he's able to do once he got to the majors. In 8 games, he pitched 15 innings, pristine ERA of 0, a whip of 0.8, a FIP of 1.4, and a component ERA of 0.91. I ended up giving him a little bit of a potential bump as well. So we had a couple of guys show out in the bullpen for us. That'll be pretty exciting going forward. All right, so checking in on our AA squad, they were able to win their first playoff series, but went down in a 3-game sweep to Mississippi, so that is going to end their season. Overall, pretty proud of them. They had a very good year and were able to push themselves in the playoffs. Here we are at the World Series. It is going to be the Toronto Blue Jays taking on the Philadelphia Phillies. Take a look at Toronto. They were in the wild card game and took 2 games out of 3 from Houston to move on to face the Twins, who they went on to sweep, and then they took down Tampa Bay in 6. For the Philadelphia Phillies, they were in the NLDS as the 2 seed. They took on wildcard winner Milwaukee, swept them, and then went on to sweep the Arizona Diamondbacks. So looks like we got ourselves a pretty heavyweight matchup. So it looks like we got ourselves a pretty heavyweight matchup going into this one. All right, so game 1 is going to be Zach Wheeler versus Kevin Gausman. That is a victory for the Blue Jays. Aaron Nola versus Alex Manoah. Victory for the Phillies. So we are even going to Toronto. Ranger Suarez versus Jose Berrios. That is a victory for the Blue Jays. Zach Wheeler again versus Yusei Kikuchi. And the Blue Jays are on the cusp of victory. Can they do it against Aaron Nola? No, we are going to force game 6. And here is Taijuan Walker facing Alex Manoah. Can the Phillies extend it to a game 7? No, they cannot. Your Toronto Blue Jays are the 2024 World Series champions. Let's check out the final box score. Looks like a blown save possibly for the Philadelphia Phillies. Nope, it was just a late inning collapse by Jose Alvarado. And the Toronto Blue Jays are your World Series champions. Checking out some awards on the season, Shohei Ohtani is the most valuable player in the National League. No surprise there. Yordan Alvarez, good for him. In the American League, love that slash line for him, although not his best season, so that's pretty surprising. Cy Young, Shohei Ohtani, shocker as that might be. Kevin Gausman in the American League, batting title. Eloy Jimenez, good for him. Average did dip down to 320 at the end of the year, but come on, dude was on fire all year. Final OPS of 929 and a final WAR of 4.0, which is actually only a couple of points higher than after we traded him, but he definitely kept up his abilities throughout the whole season, so good for him. I think the Orioles got a good one for the next 2 seasons. Checking out the National League, Francisco Lindor at a 329. Very impressive. Reliever of the Year, Devin Williams. Joan Duran. Rookie of the Year, Junior Caminero. What was his final slash line? Okay, that's a pretty good rookie year from him, and he actually played, not all games. 136 games, though, is quite a bit for him. National League, Marco Luciano, not the greatest year. Who was behind him? Joseph Ortiz? Oh, I'd have given that to Joseph Ortiz. Even if he only played 100 games compared to 146, I'm giving that to Joseph Ortiz or Jackson Merrill. Both of them outplayed Marco Luciano. Don't love that pick. Hank Aaron Award, Francisco Lindor, and Yordan Alvarez. We skipped through the Gold Gloves because those are broken. Eloy Jimenez. Let's see, did we get anybody? That's all we're going to look at is just some any of our guys won Silver Sluggers, and no. I mean, technically, Eloy did play for us for quite a bit, but he won the DH Silver Slugger. Checking at postseason MVP, Jeimer Candelario. Wow, good playoffs for him. Nationally, Kyle Schwarber hit .417 and 4 bombs. Look at that. And then World Series MVP, Alejandro Kirk. Not a great season from him, but playing hero ball in October is all that matters when it comes down to it. So anyways, that's going to be the end of our first season. I'm going to go try to shake out some things in the off season and try to get us into better situation as we start year 2. But in the meantime, between time, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'm gone. Deuces.